Okay, so today's online lecture, is on diversity in parenting, and specifically, we're going to be talking about um, lesbian and gay parents. So, again, we like to start off with a quote. So, this little girl basically said, I'm a 12-year-old girl and I have two moms. I have two people who love me very much, take care of me, and help me be the best I can be. I make straight A's in school, I play the viola, and of course, love other things that any other 12-year-old child should love. Most of all, I love my two moms. So, to overview what we're going to talk about today, we're going to go over some prevalence rates for children being raised by gay and lesbian parents, and pretty much how they figure this prevalence rates out, some assumptions and myths regarding same sex couples as parents, and talk about some empirical evidence. So, what the research actually says about um, parenting among LGBT individuals and couples, as well as child outcomes. And talk about some factors that are related to positive adjustment. And then also, we'll be talking about gay fathers. And next class period on Tuesday, we'll watch a video called Daddy and Papa, and it'll give you a good look at the experiences of some gay fathers. So, before we get into the meat of the lecture, I wanted to go over some of the class data with you. So, the question we asked on the Marriage and Family Attitudes survey, which some of you took towards the beginning of the semester, asked homosexual couples should be permitted to adopt children as long as they meet the same criteria set for heterosexual couples. And as you can see, a majority of the class either strongly agreed or agreed with this statement, with a smaller percentage either being not sure, disagreeing, or strongly disagreeing. And this actually sort of matches more national data. Our class might be a little bit more favorable in terms of rights for same sex parents and LGBT parents than the national data, but if we think about how people might have answered this question historically, there would have been a much higher percentage in the disagree or strongly disagree regarding the responses for this statement. So, when we think about the prevalence of lesbian and gay parents and children being raised by lesbian or gay parents, um, we don't know that much. So there's been very little research on this topic, and there's just been really just a few studies are providing us with all of our information that we know. It's actually very hard to know exactly how many gay and lesbian parents are in the U.S. Because of fears of discrimination, losing child custody, or visitation rights. Many gay and lesbian parents often will conceal their sexual identity. And also how this has been measured through like national data is with like the census. And so it's really hard to get estimates on lesbian or gay parents who are not in a same sex couple. The census does not have a question on it for you to select your sexual orientation. So basically, how they've kind of estimated this was if you were co residing in a house with someone who identified as the same sex you are. So when they're kind of analyzing this data, if they say two men are residing in a household, along with some other characteristics, they would group them into a like gay father role or gay father grouping. So estimates regarding lesbian mothers range from approximately 1 to 5 million, and estimates on gay fathers range from approximately 1 to 3 million people. When we think about children who are being raised by lesbian or gay parents, estimates range from 1 to 14 million, and some researchers kind of approximate it at about 6 million. But again, it's really hard, again, because of parents' potential disclosure of their sexual orientation, that these estimates can vary widely. And most researchers agree that between 1 and 12% of all U.S. children are being raised by gay or lesbian parents. There's also some other interesting characteristics of same sex couples who are raising children. And so, again, this is specifically for couples. I'm not talking about individual lesbian or gay parents here. But same sex couple parents and their children are more likely to be racial and ethnic minorities. Children or child rearing among same sex couples is also more common in the South, Mountain West, and Midwest regions of the country. So, states with the highest proportions of same sex couples raising biological, adopted, or stepchildren include Mississippi, Wyoming, Alaska, Idaho, and Montana. Interestingly, same sex couples are also more likely to be raising adopted children and also foster children. So, same sex couples are 4 times more likely than their different sex counterparts to be raising an adopted child, and they're 6 times more likely than their different sex counterparts to be raising foster children. So, this researcher, Gary Gates, he's a demographer who kind of studies the prevalence of same sex couples and parents. Basically, made a short, several page, 6-page document. And he's affiliated with the Williams Institute, and it goes through a lot of statistics and demographic information on same sex parents. So if you're interested, I have posted this under the Related Resources tab in the Diversity in Parenting lecture group. So if you're interested in learning more, there's a lot of material there that you can review. It's not a required reading, though. So moving on to some assumptions and myths regarding negative effects of gay and lesbian parents on child development. And these assumptions or myths arose out of judicial concerns, and especially in child custody cases. So in the past, if a gay or lesbian parent was seeking custody of a child that they'd had in a previous heterosexual relationship, a lot of times these myths or assumptions actually prevented that person from getting custody of their child. And so they've actually been sort of disproven through research and studies, and but we're just going to go over some of these assumptions right now. So the first is a homosexual orientation. This myth was that children brought up by gay and lesbian parents will show disturbances in their own sexual identity. So essentially what this was saying was that children brought up by a gay or lesbian parent might also be gay or lesbian. And the research has really shown that this is not accurate. And it's especially interesting when we look at this and we think about, that a lot of heterosexual parents raised gay and lesbian children. So it doesn't really follow in that regard either that your parents' sexual orientation would have an impact on your sexual orientation. Psychological health. There's a myth that children would be less psychological healthy when they grew up in gay and lesbian homes rather than children growing up in heterosexual homes.
Again, research has shown that this is not accurate. Another myth was that children may have difficulties in establishing social relationships. And so there was another myth about child molestation. And so this is, in the past, people have also often associated pedophilia with homosexuality, and those are completely different things and are not associated at all. So pedophilia is a sexual interest in children, whereas a homosexual orientation is, say, attractions to individuals of the same sex. And again, this is a myth that homosexuals are more likely to molest children. Child molesters actually are most often heterosexual white males. And children are most likely to experience intrafamilial sexual abuse by a heterosexual stepfather than by a homosexual male. And so this was actually a concern in the past, and I really want to make the distinction with you guys that this is a huge myth that homosexuality is not equated with pedophilia. So Dr. Helms told me this anecdote. So she was at an NCFR conference, which is the National Council on Family Relations, and it's a professional organization that her and I are a part of. And there was a keynote speaker who was talking about children raised by gay and lesbian parents. And she came up with this really provocative thought that really kind of silenced the room. Um, and she was asking, why are we not concerned about the well being of gay children being raised by heterosexuals who may not be supportive or are homophobic? We spend a lot of our research focus on the children of gay and lesbian parents, but focus much less on, gay and lesbian children who are raised by heterosexual parents. And as I mentioned earlier, most gay men and lesbian women were actually raised by heterosexuals. And so we spend a lot of time focusing on gay and lesbian parenting when why are we not spending an equal amount of time and effort and research thinking about the implications for gay and lesbian adolescents raised in potentially an unsupportive household? And I want to put this, what we're talking about, in the current socio-historical and political context. So this is important to know, especially for those of you that are going to end up being practitioners or working with families, kind of our history in the field of pathologizing homosexuality and same-sex couples who are parenting, or lesbian or gay individuals who are parenting. So the DSM, which is a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, this is a manual that practitioners use to help diagnose patients. So psychologists or therapists may use this. And in the past, homosexuality was actually listed in the DSM as a mental disorder. It was described as a sociopathic personality disturbance. And so this was in like the 1950s. And it wasn't actually until 1974 that homosexuality was actually no longer listed as a category or disorder. So as you can see, in our history, we, as a field, have pathologized homosexuality as a mental disorder. However, in the 1970s, due to the research of Alfred Kinsey and Evelyn Hooker, this started becoming seen as not that. So, for example, Evelyn Hooker performed a study that compared the happiness and well-adjusted nature of self-identified homosexual men with heterosexual men and found no difference. And Alfred Kinsey also studied sexual orientation, and he actually developed the Kinsey scale, and it's rating from 0 to 6, basically kind of what your sexual preferences are. And his findings basically indicated that there was great variability in sexual orientations. And instead of, the prevailing approach at that time was to pathologize and attempt to change homosexuals, but Kinsey demonstrated that it was actually more common than was assumed, and that these behaviors or sexual preferences may be part of a normal continuum of sexual behavior and attraction. And I will post a link to his website. He has something, Alfred Kinsey has the Kinsey Institute, and it's a huge research institute on sexuality. So if you guys are interested, there'll be a link that you can look at. And so around this time in the 1970s, other associations, psychological and medical associations, were starting to declassify homosexuality as a mental disorder as well. So in 1973, the American Psychiatric Association declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder, followed in 1975 by the American Psychological Association. The World Health Organization followed a little bit after in 1990. So you can see that there's been this sort of history of pathologizing homosexuals and people with same sex attractions. So conversion therapy, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, um, but really what conversion therapy is counseling basically children or adolescents who are homosexual or have same-sex attractions to try and essentially convert them to being heterosexuals. And so it's important to know, especially if you're going to be a practitioner, is kind of what the stance is of the associations that you may be affiliated with are on this therapy. So at this point, the medical establishment more or less unanimously agrees that conversion therapy does not work and actually can be abusive and harmful for adolescents. However, although we have these um, associations and affiliated organizations that have this standpoint, there's still a lot of variation in how laws regarding conversion therapy are expressed. So, only two states, California and New Jersey, have bans on the books for conversion therapy. Washington, D.C. also has a ban on conversion therapy, but similar measures to ban this sort of therapy have actually not made it through to laws in several other states. So, like New York, Michigan, Minnesota, Maryland, Wisconsin, Vermont, just naming a few states, are also attempting to pass laws to ban conversion therapy, but are having substantial difficulties, even though the research um, kind of indicates that it's not effective and can be harmful. There is one state, however, that's kind of going the opposite direction, and that's Oklahoma. And they're actually trying to make laws that will keep conversion therapy legal. So again, regarding, same-sex parenting, the American Psychological Association has publicized their stance. So in 2004, the APA Council of Representatives adopted a policy resolution including the following statement based on a review of the best available literature. So there is no scientific evidence that parenting effectiveness is related to parental sexual orientation. Lesbian and gay parents are as likely as heterosexual parents to provide supportive and healthy environments for their children. And so, this body of research that kind of informed this statement has shown that the adjustment, development, and psychological well being of children are unrelated to parental sexual orientation, and that the children of lesbian gay parents are as likely as those of heterosexual parents to flourish. So, this bullet here is actually a link to the APA's website, and there's quite a bit more information on this stance and research if you're interested. I will be presenting on child outcomes, on the next slide. So we will go over those. But it's important to know, like, if the stance of the organizations that you may be affiliated with as a practitioner in the future. So the APA is not the only organization with this stance on LGBT parenting. So a lot of other organizations with expertise in child welfare have made similar reports and resolutions in support of gay and lesbian parental rights. And so, just to name a few that you guys might end up being a part of, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychoanalytic Association, the National Association of Social Workers, and the Child Welfare League of America, just to name a few. And so, if you're a member of these and are helping families, you have to know, it's important to know that their stance is in support of LGBT parental rights. So, there are also laws in several states in the US that limit adoption or foster care services for LGBT individuals and same sex partners. I included a link here on this website, and it's pretty interesting because it shows you a map of the United States, and you can also search by states to see kind of what their laws are regarding this. And so, interestingly, parents, if they can't, if a second parent adoption essentially makes it legal for both parents, makes it so that both parents are legally responsible for a child. Your book defines second parent adoption as the legal procedure that allows individuals to adopt their partner's biological or adoptive child without terminating the first parent's legal status as parent. And so there are some provisions that you can do as a lesbian or gay parent that can at least help buffer some of this. So, like, you could make a will that states in the event of your death that your partner would have rights to your child for caring. And it's really interesting that there are such variation in laws and about this, like, over across the states, because as I mentioned earlier, gay and lesbian people are much more likely to adopt and foster children than are heterosexuals. And so this last bullet, parents by choice, why gay parents may be the best parents, that's a link to a pretty provocative article from 2012. It ran as a Yahoo News story, getting at some new studies coming out regarding gay and lesbian parents by choice. And, that means kind of either via adoption, surrogacy, artificial insemination, rather than having a child from a previous heterosexual relationship. And kind of argued why these parents actually might be better parents. So the article mentions that gay parents tend to be more motivated, more committed than heterosexual parents on average because they choose to be parents. So gay and lesbians rarely become parents by accident, compared with an almost 50% accidental pregnancy rate among heterosexuals. And this can actually translate to greater commitment on average and more involvement. And so, again, this is specifically regarding parents by choice. So, those who are choosing to become parents through adoption, surrogacy, or artificial insemination. And so, while research indicates that children of gay parents show few differences in achievement, mental health, social functioning, and among other measures, these kids actually may have the advantage of open-mindedness, tolerance, and role models for equitable relationships. And so not only that, like, as I mentioned earlier, gay and lesbians are likely to provide homes for difficult to place children in the foster system and are more likely to foster and adopt children. And so this is an interesting article that you're welcome to read if you want. It's not a required article. I know I mentioned some child outcomes, but we'll be talking about that more in depth in the next lecture. I'm going to end part one there, and we'll pick up with empirical evidence for child outcomes in the next part.